The wagon wheel cracked like a gunshot. Lena Cross didn't scream. She didn't curse. She just sat there in the driver's seat, reins loose in her hands, and watched the front axle collapse into the mud. The wheel, already patched twice with wire and prayer, split clean down the hub and sent the whole front end crashing sideways into a ditch. Her hand, wrapped in a rag that used to be white, throbbed with a heat that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. She knew what that meant. 3 days ago, she'd sliced it open on a rusty nail while loading supplies. Yesterday, red lines had started crawling up her wrist. This morning, she'd woken to find her fingers stiff and her palm swollen tight as a drum. Now the fever was setting in, turning her thoughts slow and sticky. But the wagon. The damn wagon. Lena climbed down, moving careful because the world had started tilting funny at the edges. She walked around to inspect the damage, already knowing what she'd find. The wheel was done. The axle bent. No tools in her kit could fix this, and even if she had them, her hand was useless. She couldn't grip a hammer, could barely close her fingers. She stood there, swaying slightly, and looked at the trail ahead. Flat nothing, miles of it. The land out here didn't care if you lived or died. It just waited. Behind her, she heard hoofbeats. Lena turned, slow. A wagon was coming up the trail, bigger than hers, pulled by 2 solid draft horses. A man sat up front, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a little girl beside him. Maybe 6 years old, wearing a coat too big for her. The man pulled up about 20 feet away. He didn't get down, just sat there, looking at her broken wagon, then at her. "Wheels shot," he said. Not a question. "I can see that." Lena's voice came out rougher than she meant. The fever was eating at her throat. "You hurt?" "I'm fine." The man's eyes dropped to her wrapped hand, then back to her face. He had the kind of face that had seen things, lines around his eyes, jaw tight, like he was always bracing for bad news. Late 30s, maybe. Worn down, but not broken. "That hand says different," he said. Lena shifted her stance, putting her good hand on her hip. "I said I'm fine." The little girl leaned forward, peering at Lena with wide eyes. "Papa, her hand's all wrapped up." "I see it, Maisie." The man's voice gentled when he spoke to his daughter. Then he looked back at Lena. "You got anyone coming to help you?" "No." "Supplies?" "Enough." "Tools to fix that axle?" Lena didn't answer. The man studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed and started to climb down from the wagon. "Name's Ethan Cole. This is my daughter, Maisie. We're headed west to claim land before winter sets in. You're welcome to—" "I don't need help." Ethan stopped, one boot on the wheel hub. "Didn't say you did. I'm offering it anyway." "I'm not interested." "Ma'am, that hand's infected. You can see the red lines from here. Another day or two and you'll lose the arm. Maybe your life." Lena's jaw tightened. "That's my business." "It is," Ethan agreed. He straightened up, settling back on his heels. "But out here, dying alone is a waste. You got somewhere you're trying to get to?" "West. Same as us, then." He gestured to her wagon. "You're not making it there in that. And you're sure as hell not making it there if you're dead." Something hot and sharp flared in Lena's chest. She was tired of men telling her what she could and couldn't do. Tired of being looked at like something broken that needed fixing. She'd made it this far on her own. She'd keep going. "I'll manage," she said. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, you won't." The certainty in his voice made her want to hit him. Instead, she turned her back and walked to her wagon, pulling herself up into the driver's seat with her good hand. Pain shot through her arm. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, but she blinked them away and picked up the reins. "Ma'am." "Move your wagon," Lena said. "You're blocking the trail." Behind her, she heard Maisie whisper something. Ethan's reply was too quiet to make out. Then the sound of his wagon pulling off to the side, wheels creaking through the scrub grass. Lena snapped the reins. Her horse, a tired mare named Dust, leaned into the harness. The wagon lurched. The broken wheel dragged through the dirt, the whole frame tilting so far sideways that for a second Lena thought it would tip. But it held. She drove it maybe 50 feet before the axle gave out completely. The wagon dropped with a crash that rattled her teeth. Dust whinnied and pulled, but the weight was too much, the angle too steep. The whole rig was stuck fast in a rut of its own making. Lena sat there, breathing hard. Her hand felt like it was on fire. Her head was swimming. She could feel Ethan's eyes on her back. She didn't look at him. Instead, she climbed down again, slower this time, because her legs weren't working right, and started unhitching Dust. Her fingers fumbled with the buckles. The leather was stiff. Her hand wouldn't close. She got one strap loose, then another, but the third wouldn't budge. "Let me!" She spun around. Ethan was standing right there, close enough to touch, and she hadn't even heard him come up. Maisie was back at their wagon, watching. "I didn't ask for your help," Lena said. "I know." Ethan reached past her and undid the buckle with one quick motion. "But you're getting it anyway." Lena stepped back, putting space between them. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why do you care? You don't know me." Ethan straightened up, holding Dust's lead. The horse nuzzled his shoulder, calm in a way she never was with Lena. "Because out here, people need each other, and because I've seen that look before." "What look?" "The one that says you'd rather die than owe anyone anything." Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't proud, just practical, that she'd learned a long time ago that the only person you could count on was yourself, but the words wouldn't come. Ethan tied Dust to the back of his wagon, moving efficient and sure. "There's a storm coming. I can smell it. We need to make camp before it hits." "I'm not going with you." "Then you'll die here." "Maybe." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, something like anger crossed his face. "You got a death wish. That's your choice. But don't make me explain to my daughter why I left a woman to freeze on the side of the trail because she was too stubborn to accept help." Lena flinched. She looked past him to where Maisie sat in the wagon, small and quiet, watching everything with those big eyes. "I can't pay you," Lena said finally. "Didn't ask you to." "I won't be charity." "Then work for your keep. Cook, mend, whatever you can manage with one hand. We'll figure it out." The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of snow. Lena looked at her ruined wagon, at her useless hand, at the empty miles ahead. She thought about her land claim waiting out west, the fresh start she'd promised herself, the life she was supposed to build, alone, where no one could hurt her again. But she was so tired, and the fever was getting worse. "One night," she said, "just until the storm passes." Ethan nodded. "Fair enough." He helped her up into his wagon, not because she asked, but because her legs gave out halfway and he caught her before she hit the ground. She didn't thank him, just climbed in and sat as far from him as the bench allowed. Maisie scooted closer, peering up at her. "What's your name?" "Lena." "I'm Maisie. I'm 6. How old are you?" "Maisie," Ethan said quietly. "Let her be." But Lena found herself answering anyway. 32. "That's old," Maisie said matter-of-factly. "Papa's old too. He's 37. Mama was 29 when she died." Lena's eyes cut to Ethan. He kept his gaze straight ahead, jaw working. After a moment, he snapped the reins and the wagon rolled forward. They drove in silence. The sky darkened from blue to iron gray. The wind turned mean, whipping across the open plain with nothing to stop it. Lena watched the land roll past and tried to remember the last time she'd sat in a wagon she wasn't driving. Tried to remember the last time she'd let someone else make the decisions. It had been a long time. By the time they stopped to make camp, the first snowflakes were falling. Ethan found a spot where the trail dipped down beside a dry creek bed, offering some shelter from the wind. He set to work pitching a canvas tent while Lena sat on a rock and tried to stay upright. Her fever was climbing. Everything felt far away and muffled, like she was underwater. Maisie appeared in front of her, holding a tin cup. "Papa says you should drink this." Lena took it, water, cold and clean. She drank it all. "He says you're sick," Maisie said. "Are you going to die?" "Maisie!" Ethan's voice, sharp. "It's okay." Lena handed the cup back. "I don't know. Maybe." Maisie's face scrunched up. "Mama got sick too. She had the fever and then she died. I don't want you to die." Something cracked in Lena's chest. She looked at this little girl, 6 years old and already learning that people left, that sickness took them away, that nothing was promised. "I'm going to try not to," Lena said. Maisie nodded seriously. "Good." By nightfall, the storm hit in earnest. Snow came down thick and fast, turning the world white. The wind screamed. Ethan got them all inside the tent and built a small fire from dried buffalo chips he'd been collecting along the trail. It wasn't much, but it pushed back the worst of the cold. Lena sat wrapped in a blanket, shivering. Her hand was so swollen now she couldn't see the knuckles. The pain had gone from sharp to dull, which she knew was worse. Her whole arm felt heavy and wrong. Ethan knelt beside her. "I need to look at it." "No." "Lena." His voice was firm. "If we don't clean that wound, you will lose the arm. I've seen it before. Gangrene sets in fast." "You a doctor?" "No, but I've patched up enough animals to know infected when I see it." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to back off, that she'd handle it herself. But the truth was, she couldn't. She could barely move the arm now. "Fine," she said. Ethan worked careful and methodical. He heated water over the fire until it was just short of boiling, then soaked a clean cloth in it. When he unwrapped her hand, Lena looked away. She didn't want to see. "It's bad," Ethan said quietly, "but not too far gone. The nail went deep and there's something still in there. Splinter, maybe. Rust. I need to get it out." "Do it." He pulled out a knife, held it in the fire until the blade glowed, then looked at her. "This is going to hurt. Everything hurts." Maisie came over and took Lena's good hand. Her fingers were small and warm. "You can squeeze," she said. "I don't mind." Lena squeezed. Ethan cut. The pain was instant and bright and all-consuming. Lena bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, but she didn't scream, didn't make a sound, just held onto Maisie's hand and breathed through her teeth while Ethan dug into the infected wound with the tip of his knife. "Got it," he said finally. He held up a small piece of metal, rusted and jagged. It had been buried deep in her palm, right against the bone. Ethan cleaned the wound with boiled water and whiskey. Lena did make a sound for that part, something between a hiss and a curse, then wrapped it in clean cloth. When he was done, he sat back on his heels. "That's all I can do," he said. "Now it's up to your body to fight the rest." Lena nodded. She felt wrung out, empty. Maisie was still holding her hand. "You did good," the little girl said. "You were really brave." "So were you," Lena heard herself say. That night, Lena drifted in and out of fever dreams. She was back in Missouri, in the house she'd left behind. Her husband was there, but his face kept changing. Sometimes it was him. Sometimes it was Ethan. Sometimes it was no one at all, just a shadow in the shape of a man. She woke once to find Maisie curled up beside her, sleeping. The little girl's breath was warm against her shoulder. Across the tent, Ethan sat by the fire, keeping watch. When he saw her eyes open, he nodded once. "Rest," he said. She did. By morning, the fever had broken. Lena woke to gray light filtering through the tent canvas and the smell of coffee. Her hand still hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt. Clean, sharp, not the sick heat of infection. When she flexed her fingers, they moved. She sat up slowly. Her head felt clear for the first time in days. Ethan was crouched by the fire, pouring coffee into tin cups. Maisie was still asleep, bundled in blankets. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked. "Better?" He handed her a cup. "Good. Because we need to talk." Lena wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Outside, the storm was still going, wind rattling the canvas. "About what?" "About what happens next." Ethan settled back on his heels. "Your wagon's done. Can't be salvaged, and even if it could, you're in no shape to drive it." "I know." "You said you were headed west to claim land." "That's right." "Homestead Act?" Lena nodded. "I've got papers. A claim waiting in Oregon Territory. If I don't file by December, I lose it." "It's October now," Ethan said. "That's cutting it close, even if you had a good wagon and full health. As things stand—" "I know," Lena said again. She took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and strong and exactly what she needed. "So what are you suggesting? Come with us. We're headed to the same territory, just a different valley. We can pool resources, share the work, get there faster together than either of us would alone." "And then what?" "Then you file your claim, I file mine, and we go our separate ways if that's what you want." Lena studied him over the rim of her cup. "Why would you do that? Take on dead weight?" "You're not dead weight. You're an extra pair of hands once that arm heals. And Maisie needs—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Needs what?" Ethan looked at his daughter, still sleeping. When he spoke again, his voice was low. She needs to see that people help each other, that the world isn't just a hard, mean place where everyone's out for themselves. Her mother died 6 months ago, and ever since it's just been the two of us. I want her to remember there's more to life than that. Something shifted in Lena's chest. She thought about Maisie's small hand holding hers last night, about the way the girl had said you were really brave, like it mattered. I can't promise I'll be good company, Lena said. Don't need you to be. Just need you to not die on the trail. That'd be inconvenient. The corner of Lena's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. I'll do my best. Ethan stood, extending a hand to help her up. She took it. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the tent, with coffee warming her hands and a plan taking shape, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. 1. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that tried to rip the tent from its stakes. 3 days of snow that piled up in drifts taller than Maisie. 3 days of being stuck in close quarters with two people who were still strangers, trying to figure out how to exist in the same small space. Lena learned things about them in those 3 days. She learned that Ethan woke before dawn every morning, no matter what, and checked the horses first before anything else. That he rationed their food with the precision of a man who'd gone hungry before. That he hardly ever talked about his wife, but when he did, his whole face changed, got softer, sadder, like he was looking at something far away. She learned that Maisie was quiet until she wasn't. That the little girl would sit in silence for hours, playing with a corn husk doll, and then suddenly erupt with questions. Where are you from? Why don't you have a husband? Do you like apples? My mama liked apples. She's dead now. Did you know that? Do you think it snows where she is? Lena didn't know how to answer most of those questions. But she tried. She told Maisie about Missouri, about the farm she'd grown up on, about the husband who'd seemed kind until he wasn't, about the baby she'd lost and the debt he'd left behind when he died, about deciding that the only way forward was west, to land of her own, where no one could take anything from her again. She didn't mean to tell the little girl all that. It just came out, bit by bit, in the long hours when there was nothing to do but wait for the storm to pass. Maisie listened to all of it with those wide, serious eyes. When Lena finished, the girl nodded once. My papa's sad too, she said, but he tries to hide it. I think he doesn't want me to worry. He's trying to protect you, Lena said. I know, but sometimes I wish he'd just be sad out loud. Then I could be sad too, and we could be sad together instead of being sad alone. Lena looked at this 6-year-old child and felt like she'd just been given a lesson in something important, something she'd spent her whole adult life running from. On the third night, the wind finally died. They emerged from the tent into a world transformed. Everything was white and still and impossibly quiet. The sky had cleared to a deep, cold blue, scattered with more stars than Lena had ever seen. Ethan stood beside her, breath misting in the frozen air. We'll pack up at first light. Need to make up for lost time. How far behind are we? 3 days? Maybe 4, depending on the trails. But we can push hard if we need to. Lena nodded. Her hand was healing, the swelling was down, the red lines fading. She could grip things again, though it still hurt. I can drive dust if you want. Spell you on the wagon. Ethan glanced at her wrapped hand. Can you handle the reins? I'll manage. That seems to be your favorite phrase. It served me well so far. He smiled at that, a real smile, brief but genuine. Fair enough? They broke camp in the pre-dawn gray, working together in a rhythm they were starting to find. Lena rolled the bedding while Ethan collapsed the tent. Maisie gathered their scattered cooking gear, humming to herself. The horses stamped and snorted, eager to move after 3 days standing still. By the time the sun crested the horizon, they were on the trail. The land had changed under the snow. What had been brown and dusty was now blinding white, rolling away in all directions like an ocean frozen mid-wave. The wagon cut fresh tracks through it, the only mark of human passage for miles. Lena rode Dust alongside the wagon for the first few hours, getting used to the mare's gait again, testing her hand's grip on the reins. It held. Not strong, but enough. Around midday, Ethan called a halt to rest the horses. They'd found a spot where wind had scoured the snow down to bare ground, making it easier to stop without sinking. Maisie climbed down and immediately started building a snowman, or trying to. The snow was too powdery to pack well. She ended up making a pile instead, then declared it a snow castle and began digging a moat. Lena helped Ethan check the wagon's wheels and axles, looking for any stress from the storm. Everything seemed sound. "You know anything about wagons?" Ethan asked. "Enough to break one. Not quite enough to fix one, apparently. That's more than most. My wife knew them inside and out, could repair anything with baling wire and determination." He ran a hand along one of the wheel spokes, checking for cracks. "I miss that about her, the way she never saw a problem, just puzzles to solve." Lena waited. Ethan rarely talked about his wife this directly. "Her name was Sarah," he continued. "She wanted to go west before I did. Said Missouri was too crowded, too settled. She wanted space, land where Maisie could grow up seeing horizons instead of fences." He straightened up, looking out at the endless white. "She got sick 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave. Pneumonia. Went from fine to gone in 5 days." "I'm sorry," Lena said. "Me too." Ethan dusted snow off his hands. "Part of me wanted to stay, to just settle back into the farm we had, raise Maisie there. But Sarah made me promise. Made me swear I'd still go, still give our daughter that life she dreamed about." He looked at Lena. "So here we are?" "Here we are," Lena echoed. They stood there in the cold silence for a moment. Then Maisie called out, asking them to come see her castle, and the moment broke. That night they camped in the ruins of an old homestead. Just a stone chimney and part of a wall left standing, but it was enough to block the wind. Ethan got a fire going in the old hearth, and for the first time in days, they had real warmth. Lena made dinner from their dwindling supplies: beans, salt pork, the last of the cornmeal fried into cakes. It wasn't much, but it was hot. They ate sitting on stones around the fire, while Maisie told them elaborate stories about a princess who lived in a snow castle and had adventures with talking horses. After dinner, Ethan pulled out a small wooden flute. Lena hadn't known he could play. He didn't ask if they wanted to hear it, just started playing. A slow, sad melody that sounded like it came from somewhere far away and long ago. Maisie curled up next to Lena, her head resting against Lena's shoulder. The little girl's hair smelled like wood smoke and cold air. When the song ended, nobody spoke. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, lonely and wild. "We should sleep," Ethan said finally. "Long day tomorrow." But Maisie was already asleep, her breath even and deep. Lena carefully shifted so the girl could lie down more comfortably, then covered her with an extra blanket. When she looked up, Ethan was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" Lena asked. "Nothing. Just... She doesn't usually take to people that fast." "I'm not doing anything special." "I know. That's what I mean." Lena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just banked the fire for the night and lay down herself, Maisie warm against her side, and watched the stars through the broken roof until sleep took her. The trail got harder after that. The snow made everything slower, harder to read. What looked like solid ground might be a frozen stream, ready to give way. What seemed like a gentle slope could hide rocks that would snap an axle if you hit them wrong. They crossed a river on the 5th day after the storm. The water ran black and fast, chunks of ice spinning in the current. There was a ford marked on Ethan's map, but the storm had changed things. The banks were higher, the water deeper. Ethan stood at the edge, studying the crossing. "We could wait, see if it drops in a day or two." "We don't have days to spare," Lena said. "No, we don't." They rigged a guide rope across, tying one end to a cottonwood on their side, the other to a boulder on the far bank. Ethan would drive the wagon across while Lena rode Dust alongside, both of them using the rope to keep from being swept downstream. Maisie would wait on the bank until they made it across, then they'd pull her over on the rope. "I don't like this," Maisie said, her voice small. "Neither do I," Ethan admitted. "But there's no good way across. Only ways that might work and ways that definitely won't." He knelt down to her level. "You trust me?" "Yes, Papa." "Then trust this will work." He kissed her forehead, then climbed up onto the wagon. Lena swung onto Dust's back, her healing hand aching with the effort of gripping. The mare danced sideways, sensing the danger. "Easy," Lena murmured. "Easy." Ethan snapped the reins. The draft horses balked at the water's edge, but he pushed them forward, and they went in step by reluctant step. The current hit the wagon hard, shoving it sideways. The wheels fought for purchase on the rocky bottom. Lena urged Dustin beside them. The cold hit like a fist, stealing her breath. The water rose to her knees, then her thighs. Dust swam more than walked, powerful shoulders churning through the current. Halfway across, one of the draft horses stumbled. The wagon lurched, tilting hard to the right. For a heartbeat, Lena thought it would flip, spilling everything into the black water. But Ethan hauled on the reins and the horse caught itself and the wagon righted. Then they were through, the horses lunging up the far bank, the wagon wheels finding solid ground. Lena guided Dust up beside them, both of them streaming water, shaking with cold. On the far bank, Maisie stood watching, small and alone. "Your turn, sweetheart," Ethan called. "Hold tight to the rope." The little girl grabbed the guide rope with both hands and stepped into the water. She gasped at the cold. The current pushed at her legs, trying to knock her down, but she held on, moved hand over hand, pulling herself across. Lena watched, her heart in her throat. If Maisie slipped, if she lost her grip. But she didn't. She made it across, climbed out shivering and soaked, and Ethan swept her up in his arms, holding her tight. "You did it," he said. "My brave girl." They made camp early that day, needing to dry out and warm up before pushing on. Ethan built the fire high while Lena stripped Maisie out of her wet clothes and wrapped her in every dry blanket they had. The girl's lips were blue, her whole body shaking. "Is she okay?" Lena asked. "She will be. Just needs warmth." But that night, Maisie started coughing. It was a small thing at first. "Just a tickle," she said. But by morning, it was deeper, rattling in her chest. Her forehead felt too warm. Ethan's face went tight when he felt it. "It's just a cold," he said. But his voice was too controlled, too careful. They traveled anyway because stopping wouldn't help and they were running out of time. But Ethan kept Maisie bundled in the wagon instead of letting her run alongside like usual. Every hour he'd stop to check on her, feel her forehead, listen to her breathing. The cough got worse. By the third day after the river crossing, Maisie had a fever. By the fourth, she was barely conscious, her breath coming in shallow wheezes. "We need to find help," Lena said. "A town, a doctor, something." Ethan stared at his map like it might suddenly show answers it hadn't before. "Nearest settlement is 3 days hard travel, maybe more in this snow. Then we go." "She might not make it 3 days." The words hung between them, terrible and true. Lena looked at the little girl lying in the wagon bed, her face flushed with fever, and felt something crack inside her chest. This child who'd held her hand through pain, who'd called her brave, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder like she belonged there. "What do we do?" Lena asked quietly. Ethan's hands were shaking. She'd never seen him shake before. "I don't know. When Sarah got sick, I didn't know what to do then either. I just watched her slip away." His voice broke. "I can't do that again. I can't lose her too." Lena grabbed his shoulders, made him look at her. "You're not going to. We're not going to let that happen." "How? How do we stop it?" "I don't know yet, but we figure it out. That's what we do. We figure it out." She said it with more confidence than she felt. But someone had to be strong right now, and Ethan was breaking, so it had to be her. They made camp in a stand of pine trees that offered some protection from the wind. Lena boiled water and made a steam tent over Maisie, trying to ease her breathing. She crushed pine needles into the water, remembering something her mother had done once when she was sick as a child. Maybe it would help. Maybe it wouldn't. But doing nothing was worse. Ethan sat beside his daughter, holding her hand, whispering to her in a voice too low for Lena to hear. All night, Lena kept the fire going, kept water boiling, kept the steam tent filled. She barely slept. Every time Maisie coughed, she jolted awake, ready to do whatever needed doing. Toward dawn, the little girl's fever spiked. She started shaking, her teeth chattering so hard Lena could hear it. Ethan tried to hold her, but she was thrashing, caught in dreams or pain or something worse. "Do something," Ethan said, and it wasn't quite a shout, but close. "Please, you have to do something." "I'm trying," Lena shot back. "I'm doing everything I know." And it wasn't enough. She could see it wasn't enough. This child was dying and there was nothing. No. Lena stood up, made a decision. Keep her warm, Don't let her throw off the blankets." "Where are you going?" "To find help." "There's no one out here?" "Then I'll find something else. Medicine, herbs, I don't know. But I'm not sitting here watching her die." Lena grabbed her coat and walked out into the pre-dawn cold before Ethan could argue, before she could think too hard about what she was doing. She had no idea where she was going or what she'd find. But she walked anyway, pushing through knee-deep snow, searching for anything that might help. An hour later, frozen and exhausted, she found it. A cluster of willow trees growing beside a half-frozen creek. The bark. She remembered someone telling her once that willow bark could bring down fever. Or maybe she'd dreamed it, but it was something. She stripped bark from the trees with numb fingers, stuffed her pockets full, and ran back to camp. "Boil this," she gasped, dumping the bark into Ethan's hands. "Make her drink it. It's willow bark. It might bring the fever down." "Might? It's all I've got." They boiled the bark until the water turned brown and bitter. Lena spooned it between Maisie's cracked lips, a little at a time, while Ethan held her head up. Most of it ran back out, but some went down. They waited. Dawn broke. The sun climbed higher. Maisie's breathing was so shallow, Lena kept leaning close to make sure she was still alive. And then, sometime around midday, the fever broke. Maisie's eyes fluttered open. She looked at her father, then at Lena, confused and exhausted. "Water," she whispered. Ethan let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. He brought water, helped her drink. Lena sat back on her heels, dizzy with relief. "You came back," Maisie said to Lena, her voice rough. "Of course I did." "I thought you might leave. Everyone leaves." Lena reached out and smoothed the girl's sweat-damp hair back from her forehead. "Not me. I'm too stubborn for that." Maisie's eyes drifted closed again, but she was smiling. That night, while Maisie slept, really slept, not that terrible fever sleep, Ethan found Lena sitting by the fire. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on her. On us." Lena poked at the fire with a stick. "Wouldn't have anywhere else to go anyway. Might as well stay." But they both knew that wasn't true. She could have left. Should have left, maybe, if she was still the woman who'd refused help beside her broken wagon. But something had changed. She wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe when Maisie first took her hand. Maybe when Ethan cut the infection from her palm. Maybe in 100 small moments between then and now. All she knew was that when she'd walked into that frozen dawn looking for willow bark, she hadn't been thinking about her land claim or her fresh start. She'd been thinking about a 6-year-old girl who called her brave and deserved to grow up. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without wanting to, Lena had started caring whether she lived or died alone. Ethan sat down beside her. For a while they didn't talk, just sat together in the firelight, listening to Maisie's easy breathing, watching the stars come out. Finally, Ethan said, "I was wrong about you." "Yeah?" "Yeah. When I first saw you beside that broken wagon, I thought you had a death wish. That you wanted to die out here alone rather than accept help." "Maybe I did," Lena admitted. "But that's not it, is it? You just didn't want to owe anyone, didn't want to need anyone." Lena didn't answer. "I understand that," Ethan said quietly. "After Sarah died, I told myself I'd never rely on anyone again. It was just going to be me and Maisie against the world. Safer that way. Can't lose what you don't have." He looked at her. "But that's not living. That's just surviving, and there's a difference." "Is there?" Lena asked. "Seems like survival is all we get out here. Maybe, but maybe not." Ethan stood, brushed snow off his pants. "Get some sleep. We've got hard travel ahead tomorrow." He went to check on Maisie, leaving Lena alone with her thoughts. She sat there long into the night, thinking about pride and survival and the difference between the two, thinking about a little girl who'd chosen to trust her, about a man who'd saved her life when she didn't want saving, about the fact that somewhere along this frozen trail, she'd stopped running away from something and started moving toward something instead. She wasn't sure yet what that something was, but for the first time in a long time, she wanted to find out. The morning after Maisie's fever broke, they woke to find their supplies dangerously low. Ethan took inventory while Lena rekindled the fire. 2 days of salt pork left, maybe 3 if they stretched it. Half a bag of cornmeal. The beans were gone. Coffee, too. They had water at least, plenty of that between the snow and the creek, but you couldn't live on water alone. We need to hunt, Ethan said, staring at the meager pile of provisions. Lena looked up from the fire. You any good with a rifle? Good enough. You? I can shoot. Not well, but I won't waste ammunition. Maisie sat up in her bedroll, still pale, but alert. Can I come? No, Ethan and Lena said at the same time. The girl's face fell. But I'm better now. You're alive now, Ethan corrected. Better is going to take a few more days. You stay here, keep warm, don't wander off. That's boring. Boring keeps you breathing. They left Maisie wrapped in blankets by the fire, with strict instructions not to move. Lena checked on her 3 times before they even left the camp clearing, making sure she had water within reach, that the fire was built up high enough to last. She'll be fine, Ethan said as they trudged into the trees. You don't have to mother her. I'm not mothering. I'm just making sure she doesn't freeze or fall in the creek, or that's called mothering. Lena shut her mouth. She didn't know how to argue with that, so she didn't try. They walked in silence through the pine forest, looking for tracks. The snow made it easier to spot signs of game, rabbit trails, deer prints, the distinctive drag marks of a porcupine. But actually finding the animals was another matter. Everything with sense was bedded down somewhere warm, waiting out the cold. An hour in, Ethan stopped. He pointed to a set of tracks crossing a small clearing, deer by the look of them, fresh enough that the edges hadn't started to blur. You go around that way, he said quietly, gesturing left. Push anything you find back toward me. I'll wait here. Lena nodded and moved off through the trees. The snow muffled her footsteps, but she still tried to step carefully. Her hand ached from the cold, but the grip was solid enough. She could pull a trigger if she needed to. She circled wide, moving slow. The forest was eerily quiet, just the whisper of wind through pine branches and the occasional crack of ice breaking somewhere in the distance. She'd almost completed the loop when she saw it. A doe standing in a thicket, head down, pawing at the snow to reach the frozen grass beneath. Lena raised her rifle, sighted down the barrel. Her finger found the trigger. The doe lifted its head, looked right at her with those big dark eyes. Lena's hand wavered. She'd killed animals before. Chickens, mostly. Once a pig that had broken its leg. It was part of farm life. You did what needed doing. But standing here in the frozen silence, looking at this creature that was just trying to survive the same winter she was, something stuck in her throat. The doe turned and bounded away, white tail flashing. Lena lowered the rifle. Did you see it? Ethan's voice came from behind her. She turned. He was standing at the edge of the thicket, rifle in hand. Yeah. Why didn't you shoot? I don't know. Ethan studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Come on. There'll be others. But there weren't. They searched for another 2 hours and found nothing but tracks and wind. By the time they gave up and headed back to camp, Lena's feet were numb, and her fingers wouldn't bend right. Maisie was exactly where they'd left her, playing with her corn husk doll and humming to herself. Did you get anything? She asked. No, Ethan said. He didn't mention that Lena had let their best chance walk away. Just started breaking down the camp, getting ready to move. That night, they ate the last of the salt pork with a handful of cornmeal mush. It wasn't enough. Lena's stomach was still growling when she lay down to sleep. Beside her, Maisie whispered, Are we going to starve? No, Lena said, trying to sound certain. We'll find food tomorrow. Promise? Lena thought about the doe's dark eyes, about her own hesitation, about how quickly certainty could turn to dust out here. I promise we'll try, she said finally. It was the most honest answer she had. The next day brought colder weather and no game. They ate plain cornmeal for breakfast and dinner both. Ethan's face was getting that tight, controlled look again, the one he got when he was trying not to show how worried he was. On the third day, Lena woke before dawn and slipped out of camp alone. She took the rifle and walked until the sun came up, searching. This time, when she found tracks, she followed them hard and fast, pushing through her exhaustion and the gnawing ache in her belly. When she finally spotted the rabbit sitting at the base of a juniper bush, she didn't hesitate. She shot it clean through the head. Ethan had a fire going when she got back to camp. She dropped the rabbit at his feet. Breakfast, she said. He looked at her, then at the rabbit, then back at her. Something shifted in his expression. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I only know how to shoot them, not cook them. But Ethan knew. He skinned and gutted the rabbit with efficient movements, spitted it over the fire. The smell of roasting meat made Lena's mouth water so much she had to swallow hard. When it was done, they divided it 3 ways. It wasn't much, a rabbit doesn't go far between 3 people. But it was warm and real and tasted better than anything Lena could remember eating. Maisie gnawed every scrap of meat off her portion of bone, then licked her fingers. That was good. It was, Ethan agreed. He looked at Lena. You did good. Lena shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just got lucky. Luck is something. Out here, I'll take whatever we can get. They pushed on through country that got rougher with each mile. The trail they'd been following faded out completely, forcing Ethan to navigate by map and compass. The land rose and fell in steep ridges that made the wagon creak and groan with every descent. On the 5th day after Maisie's fever broke, they crested a ridge and saw smoke in the distance. Is that a town? Maisie asked, leaning forward. Ethan studied it through his small brass spyglass. No, too small. Trading post, maybe. Or a ranch. Should we check it out? Lena asked. We should. Could use supplies. And I'd like to know we're still on the right trail. They angled toward the smoke. It took most of the afternoon to reach it. Distances were deceptive out here, everything farther than it looked. But eventually they came around a bend and found the source. A rough log building with a plank roof, smoke pouring from a stone chimney. A few smaller structures stood nearby. A stable, a storehouse. 3 horses were tied out front. Ethan pulled the wagon up 100 yards out. Wait here. Why? Lena asked. Because I don't know who those horses belong to. Could be traders, could be trouble. So you're going to walk in alone and find out which? That's the idea. Lena grabbed his arm. Bad idea. You go in there alone and things go wrong. What are we supposed to do? Ethan looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. What do you suggest? We go together. Maisie stays with the wagon. If shooting starts, she drives away fast and doesn't look back. I don't like that plan either. You got a better one? He didn't. They left Maisie in the wagon with the reins in her small hands and strict instructions to run at the first sign of trouble. The little girl looked scared, but determined. We'll be right back, Lena said. You better be. Lena and Ethan walked to the trading post together, rifles in hand but not raised, trying to look cautious, not aggressive. The door opened before they reached it. A man stepped out, tall, weathered, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen hard years. He took in their weapons, their worn clothes, the wagon in the distance. You folks lost? He asked. Just traveling through, Ethan said, hoping to trade for supplies if you have any. Might. Depends what you got to trade with. Silver, not much, but some. The man grunted. Silver spends. Come on in then. But the rifles stay outside. Ethan hesitated. Lena could see him weighing it, the risk of going in unarmed against the need for food. I'll keep mine, Lena said to the man. You can keep yours too if it makes you feel better. But I'm not walking into a strange place with no way to defend myself. The man's eyebrows went up. Then he laughed, a rough barking sound. Fair enough, lady, fair enough. Name's Walker. I run this post and I run it honest. You'll get no trouble from me. Inside, the trading post was dim and cluttered. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned goods, ammunition, rope, tools, everything a traveler might need and some things they probably didn't. 2 men sat at a rough table in the corner playing cards. They looked up when Lena and Ethan entered, then went back to their game. Walker moved behind a makeshift counter. So what do you need? Ethan pulled out his list. Coffee, beans, cornmeal, salt pork if you have it, blankets, ammunition for a Winchester. Walker nodded, pulling items from shelves. Where you headed? Oregon Territory. Got land claims waiting. This late in the season, you're cutting it close. We know. Walker set a bag of coffee on the counter. You know the pass is likely closed by now? Snow's been heavy this year. Ethan's face went tight. Which pass? The one you're headed for, I'd wager. Carson's Gap. Snowed in hard about a week ago. Won't clear until spring. Silence. Lena watched Ethan process this, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. If the main pass was closed, they'd have to go around, adding weeks to their journey. weeks they didn't have. Is there another way through? Lena asked. Walker scratched his beard. There's the low trail. Follows the river valley instead of going over the mountains. Takes longer and it's rougher going, but it stays below the snow line. Should still be passable. Should be? Ethan repeated. Nothing's guaranteed out here. You know that. Ethan looked at Lena. She could see the question in his eyes. What do we do? We take the low trail, she said. We've come too far to turn back now. Walker tallied up their purchases. The cost was steep. Almost all the silver Ethan had, but they needed the supplies, so he paid it. As they were loading up, Walker said, You got a woman and child with you? My daughter, Ethan said carefully, and my traveling companion. Walker nodded toward Lena. She know how to use that rifle she's carrying? Well enough, Lena said. Good, because the low trail goes through rough country. I've heard reports of raiders working that area, desperate men doing desperate things. You see any riders that don't look right, you put distance between you and them fast. Understand? We understand, Ethan said. They walked back to the wagon in silence. Maisie perked up when she saw them coming, relief washing over her face. Everything okay? She asked. Fine, Ethan said. We got what we needed. But that night, after they'd made camp a few miles from the trading post, he told Lena the truth. We're in trouble. She was checking the new supplies, taking inventory. The pass, the timing, the raiders, all of it. If we take the low trail and it's as rough as Walker said, we might not make it to the land office before the deadline. And if we run into trouble, he trailed off, then we deal with it. That's your answer for everything. It's worked so far. Ethan rubbed his face. I'm tired, Lena. I'm tired of barely making it. Tired of everything being harder than it needs to be. Sarah and I, we planned this trip for 2 years, had every detail worked out, and then she died and it all went to hell, and I'm just trying to keep my daughter alive long enough to give her the life her mother wanted for her. His voice cracked. But I don't know if I can. Lena sat back on her heels. She'd never heard him talk like this, so raw, so close to breaking. Part of her wanted to tell him it would be okay, that they'd make it. But she didn't deal in false comfort. You're right, she said instead. Everything is harder than it needs to be. And we might not make it, but giving up guarantees we won't. So we keep going until we can't anymore. That's all we can do. Ethan looked at her. When did you get so damn stubborn? I've always been stubborn. You're just noticing now. He almost smiled. Fair point. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ethan said, You could still leave, you know. Head back to that trading post, hire on with another wagon train heading south. Get to your land claim the safe way. Could, Lena agreed, but I won't. Why not? She thought about that. About the girl sleeping in the wagon. About the man sitting across from her who'd saved her life when she didn't want saving. About how somewhere along this frozen trail they'd stopped being strangers. Because I made a promise, she said finally, to Maisie, that we'd try. And I keep my promises. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder, brief, awkward, sincere. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're not there yet. But they both knew the truth. She was in this now. All the way in. For better or worse. The low trail was everything Walker had warned them about and more. It cut through narrow canyons where the wagon barely fit, the wheels scraping rock on both sides. It forded streams swollen with snowmelt, the water running so fast and loud you couldn't hear yourself think. It climbed over loose scree that shifted under the horses' hooves, threatening to send the whole rig sliding backward. They made maybe 10 miles a day if they were lucky. Usually less. Maisie stopped asking how much farther. She just held on tight when the wagon tilted and helped with camp chores and sang quiet songs to herself. The fever had taken something out of her. Not her spirit exactly, but her energy. She tired easily now, fell asleep before full dark. Ethan watched her constantly, worry etched into every line of his face. She's getting stronger, Lena said one night. She's not getting stronger fast enough. She's 6 years old and survived pneumonia in a wagon on a frozen trail. Give her some credit. Ethan poked at the fire. Sarah used to say I worried too much, that I needed to trust that things would work out. And she was the optimist. I'm the one who plans for disaster. Lucky we have both covered then. He looked at her. You're not an optimist. No, but I'm still here. That counts for something. On the 8th day on the low trail, they ran into their first real problem. The path ahead was blocked by a rock slide, tons of stone and debris that had come down off the canyon wall, completely covering the trail. No way over it. No way around it. They could either turn back and lose days retracing their route, or clear it. Ethan stared at the pile of rock. This is going to take hours, maybe days. Then we better start. They worked through the afternoon moving rocks one by one. Some were small enough to carry. Others had to be rolled. The biggest ones, they rigged ropes around and used the horses to drag them aside. Maisie helped with the small stones, making a game of it. But even she eventually ran out of energy and sat down in the wagon to rest. By sunset, they'd barely made a dent. We're not going to finish today, Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. Then we camp here and finish tomorrow. They did. And the day after that. And the day after that. It took 4 days to clear enough of the slide to get the wagon through. 4 days of backbreaking work, of hands rubbed raw, of muscles screaming. When they finally made it past the last of the debris, Lena's whole body felt like one giant bruise. But they were through. The canyon opened up into a wider valley, and for the first time in weeks they could see distance. Hills rolled away to the horizon, covered in scrub pine and winter-brown grass. A frozen river snaked through the middle, catching the late afternoon light. It's pretty, Maisie said. It was. Harsh and cold and unforgiving, but pretty in its way. They made camp early that night, too exhausted to push any further. Ethan built up the fire while Lena started on dinner, beans and salt pork, the same thing they'd been eating for days. But she was so hungry, it might as well have been a feast. After they ate, Maisie fell asleep almost immediately, curled up in her blankets. Ethan covered her with his coat, tucking it around her shoulders. She's tough, Lena said. She shouldn't have to be. She's 6. Life doesn't care about should. Ethan sat down heavily. No, I guess it doesn't. They sat in silence, watching the fire. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Another answered it. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. You just did. Funny. I mean, really ask you something. Lena tensed. She didn't like personal questions, but she nodded anyway. Why did you really come west? I know you said land and a fresh start, but there's more to it than that. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, My husband died 3 years ago. Left me with debts I couldn't pay and a farm that wasn't worth what we owed on it. The bank took it all. I worked for a while, saved what I could, but Missouri, everywhere I went, I was just the widow woman who lost everything. People looked at me like I was broken, like I needed fixing. And you didn't want to be fixed. I didn't want to be looked at like that anymore. Out here, nobody knows me. Nobody knows what I lost or what I failed at. I can just be. Ethan nodded slowly. I understand that. Do you? Yeah. Back home, everyone knew Sarah, knew what we'd lost. Every time I walked into town, I saw it on their faces, the pity, the sympathy. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. Had to leave, even if that wasn't the original reason we planned to go west. Lena looked at him. You ever think about going back? Sometimes, when things get hard. But then I remember why we left, and I know we can't. We? Lena repeated. Yeah, we. He met her eyes. You're part of this now, whether you meant to be or not. Something warm uncurled in Lena's chest. She wasn't sure what to call it, wasn't sure she wanted to name it at all. I should sleep, she said, standing up. Long day tomorrow. But she felt Ethan watching her as she walked to the wagon, and that warmth didn't go away. 2 days later, they saw the riders. There were 4 of them, moving parallel to the trail about a mile out. Too far to make out details, but close enough to be noticed, close enough to be following. Ethan spotted them first. He didn't say anything, just quietly loaded his rifle and set it within easy reach. Lena saw what he was doing. The raiders Walker mentioned? Maybe, or maybe just travelers. You don't believe that? No. They kept moving, watching the distant riders out of the corners of their eyes. The riders kept pace, but didn't come closer. Not yet. That night, they made camp in a defensible spot, a rocky outcrop that protected their backs and gave them a clear view of the approaches. Ethan kept the fire small and set up watch rotations. I'll take first shift, Lena said. You need to sleep. So do you. We'll both take shifts. That's how this works. He didn't argue, just showed her where he'd positioned the spare ammunition and how he wanted the watch run. Stay alert. Wake him at the first sign of trouble. Don't try to be a hero. Lena sat with her back against cold stone, rifle across her lap, and watched the darkness. Hours crawled past. The fire burned down to coals, the wind picked up, bringing the smell of snow. Nothing moved in the night, but she could feel them out there, waiting. When Ethan took over the watch, Lena tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound made her jolt awake. The crack of a branch, the call of a night bird, the shift of a horse's weight. Morning came gray and cold. The riders were gone. Maybe they moved on, Maisie said hopefully. Ethan and Lena exchanged a look. Neither of them believed that. They traveled hard that day, pushing the horses faster than was safe on the rough trail. The wagon jolted and bounced. Maisie hung on tight and didn't complain. By afternoon, they saw the riders again, closer this time, close enough to count them, to see they were armed. What do they want? Maisie asked, her voice small. Nothing good, Ethan said. He looked at Lena. We need to make a choice, run or stand. We can't outrun them, not with the wagon. No, so we stand. He found a spot where the trail narrowed between two rock faces, a natural choke point where the wagon could block the path. They pulled up there and waited. The riders came at sunset. They rode in slow and casual, like they had all the time in the world. 4 men, rough-looking, with the kind of eyes that had stopped seeing other people as human a long time ago. Their leader, a big man with a scar splitting his lip, pulled up 30 feet away. Evening, he called. Ethan stepped forward, rifle in hand but not raised. Evening. That's a nice wagon you got there. Good horses, too. They're ours. The scarred man smiled. Everything's negotiable, friend. We got silver. Make you a fair offer. Not for sale. That's too bad. The man's smile didn't waver. See, we've been following you for 3 days now. And the way I see it, you got a woman and a child with you. You're outnumbered 4-1. You're going to want to think real careful about your next move. Lena stepped up beside Ethan, her own rifle ready. We've thought about it. Answer's still no. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. Brave words for a woman. Not brave, just honest. One of the other riders started to move his horse forward. The scarred man held up a hand, stopping him. I'll tell you what, he said. We'll make this real simple. You give us the wagon and the horses, and we let you walk away. You and your women and the kid. You got my word on that. Your word, Ethan repeated flatly. That's right. And if we refuse? The scarred man shrugged. Then we take it anyway, and you don't walk away. Silence. Lena could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel Maisie behind her in the wagon, scared but quiet. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. Here's my counteroffer. You ride away now, and we don't shoot you. The scarred man laughed. You got sand, I'll give you that, but sand doesn't stop bullets. Neither does arrogance. The man's face hardened. Last chance, friend. Not your friend. And my answer hasn't changed. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched taut as wire. Then the scarred man nodded to his men. Everything happened fast. The riders spurred forward. Ethan fired, the crack of the rifle impossibly loud in the narrow space. One of the men jerked backward in his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Lena fired a split second later. Missed. The riders were too close, moving too fast. She worked the lever, fired again. This time she hit something. A horse screamed and reared, throwing its rider. Then Ethan was beside her, both of them firing as fast as they could, worked the levers, smoke and noise filling the air. One of the riders made it through, came straight at them. Lena saw the man's face, twisted with rage, saw him raise his pistol. Ethan threw himself in front of her. The pistol fired. Ethan went down. Lena screamed, or thought she did. She couldn't hear anything over the ringing in her ears, and shot the rider point blank. He toppled from his horse. Then silence. 3 riders down. The 4th, the one with the wounded shoulder, was galloping away, bent low over his horse's neck. Lena dropped her rifle and fell to her knees beside Ethan. Where? Where did he hit you? Leg, Ethan gasped. Just the leg. She looked. Blood was spreading across his thigh, soaking through his pants. A lot of blood. Maisie, Lena called. Stay in the wagon! She ripped Ethan's pants open. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his thigh, missing the bone but tearing up muscle. He was losing blood fast. Lena tore off her shawl and wrapped it tight around the wound, pressing hard. Ethan bit back a groan. I need to get you in the wagon, she said. The bodies can wait. You can't. She got her shoulder under his arm and hauled him upright. He was heavy, all dead weight leaning on her, but she managed, somehow. Got him to the wagon, got him inside. Maisie was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. It's okay, Lena said, though it wasn't. He's going to be okay. She climbed into the driver's seat, grabbed the reins. The horses were spooked, dancing and pulling. She got them under control through sheer force of will and drove. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Away from the bodies, away from the blood, away from the sight of Ethan going down. She drove until the horses were staggering with exhaustion, then pulled off the trail into a stand of trees and stopped. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely tie off the reins. Behind her, Maisie whispered, Is Papa going to die? Lena turned around. Ethan was unconscious, his face gray with blood loss. The makeshift bandage was soaked through. No, Lena said, he's not. I won't let him. She climbed back into the wagon and got to work. The first thing Lena did was build a fire. Not a small one, a real fire, big enough to heat water and give light to work by. Her hands moved on instinct, muscle memory from all the time she'd patched up animals on the farm. This was the same, she told herself, just another wound that needed cleaning. Except it wasn't the same. This was Ethan. Maisie, she said, keeping her voice level, I need you to help me. The girl wiped her eyes and nodded. What do I do? Boil water, as much as you can, and find clean cloth, anything we can use for bandages. While Maisie worked, Lena cut away what was left of Ethan's pants. The bullet had gone straight through, which was good, meant she didn't have to dig for it. But the damage was bad. The exit wound was ragged, torn up worse than the entry. Blood still seeped out despite the pressure she'd been applying. She washed her hands in the hot water, then unwrapped the soaked shawl. Fresh blood welled up immediately. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. How bad? Bad enough. Bullet went through clean, but you're going to need stitches. You know how to stitch? I've sewn up pigs. Can't be that different. He almost laughed, but it came out as a cough. That's comforting. Lena threaded a needle with trembling fingers. She'd done this before, stitched up a gash on her father's arm once, years ago. But her father had been drunk enough not to feel it. Ethan was wide awake. This is going to hurt, she said. Everything hurts lately. He gripped the side of the wagon. Just do it. She did. Ethan didn't scream, but the sounds he made were worse. Low, animal grunts of pain that made Maisie cover her ears. Lena worked as fast as she could, pushing the needle through torn flesh, pulling the edges together. Her stitches weren't pretty, but they held. By the time she finished both wounds, sweat was running down her face despite the cold. Ethan had passed out again, which was probably for the best. She wrapped the leg in clean bandages, then sat back and looked at what she'd done. The stitches were crooked, the wounds still angry and red. But the bleeding had slowed. It would have to be enough. Maisie crept close. Is he going to be okay now? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. You did good, the girl whispered. You saved him. Lena pulled her close, held her tight. We're not safe yet. We need to keep moving. But Papa can't. I know, so I'll drive. You'll keep watch on him. Make sure he stays warm. Can you do that? Maisie nodded against her shoulder. I can do that. They rested there for 2 hours, long enough for the horses to recover and for Lena to get some water into Ethan. Then she climbed into the driver's seat and took the reins. She'd driven wagons before, but never one this heavy, never with this much at stake. The horses sensed her uncertainty and tested her, pulling against the reins, trying to set their own pace. She fought them for control, and won, barely. They traveled through the night. Lena didn't dare stop, didn't dare let her guard down. Every shadow could be the fourth raider coming back with reinforcements. Every sound could be danger. Behind her, Maisie sang quiet songs to her unconscious father, the same lullabies he'd probably sung to her once. The sound of it made Lena's throat tight. Dawn came gray and cold, Snow started falling again, light at first, then heavier. Lena pulled her coat tighter and kept driving. By midday, her arms were shaking from holding the reins. Her back screamed from the wagon seat, but she didn't stop. Maisie climbed up front beside her. "You need to rest." "I'm fine." "You're not. You look like Papa looked before he fell down." Lena wanted to argue, but the girl was right. She was exhausted, running on nothing but fear and stubbornness. "There," Maisie said, pointing. "Those rocks. We can stop there." It was a good spot, sheltered, defensible. Lena guided the horses in and finally let go of the reins. Her hands wouldn't uncurl. The muscles had locked from gripping too long. Maisie took them gently and worked the fingers loose the way Ethan had probably taught her. "There. Better?" "Better," Lena managed. She climbed into the back. Ethan was still unconscious, his skin too hot to the touch. Fever had set in. "No," Lena whispered. "Not again." She'd just gotten Maisie through fever. She couldn't do this again, couldn't watch another person burn up from the inside while she stood helpless. But she had to try. She spent the rest of the day fighting the fever, cold compresses, willow bark tea forced between his lips, anything she could think of. Maisie helped without being asked, fetching water, keeping the fire going, watching her father with huge, scared eyes. By nightfall, the fever still hadn't broken. Lena sat beside Ethan and took his hand. It was calloused and rough, bigger than hers. She thought about how this hand had unwrapped her infected wound, had fired a rifle to protect her, had caught her when she stumbled. "Don't you dare die on me," she said quietly. "You hear me, Ethan Cole? We didn't come this far for you to quit now." He didn't answer, just kept breathing, shallow and too fast. Maisie curled up next to Lena. "Tell me a story." "I don't know any stories." "Yes, you do. Everyone knows stories." So Lena told her about Missouri, about the farm where she grew up, with chickens that would roost in the apple trees and a barn cat that thought it was a dog. About her mother teaching her to bake bread, how the kitchen would fill with that warm yeast smell on winter mornings. She told her about things she hadn't thought about in years, good things, before everything went wrong. And somewhere in the telling, Maisie fell asleep. Lena kept talking anyway, talking to the unconscious man, to the sleeping child, to herself. "I didn't want this," she said. "Didn't want to care about anyone again. It's easier alone, safer, can't lose what you don't have." She squeezed Ethan's hand. "But you wouldn't let me stay alone, would you? Had to go and save my life. Had to make me part of this." The fire crackled. The wind howled outside their shelter. "So you better live," Lena said, "because I'm not doing this without you. I don't know how." She laid her head down on the edge of the wagon and closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she woke, it was dawn and Maisie was shaking her. "Lena! Lena! Wake up!" She jerked upright, reaching for the rifle. "What? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Papa's awake." Lena spun around. Ethan's eyes were open, clear for the first time in 2 days. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. Relief hit her so hard she almost couldn't breathe. "Hey yourself. Did I die?" "Not yet." "Feels like I might have." Maisie threw herself at him, careful of his leg. "You scared me." "I scared myself." Ethan wrapped an arm around his daughter, then looked at Lena. "You got us out of there." "Barely." "But you did. How long was I out?" 2 days. His eyes widened. 2 days? "We need to move. If that fourth raider—" "Already thought of that. We're miles from where it happened. I've been driving." "You can't drive this wagon." "I just did. For 2 days straight." Ethan stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I'm starting to think there's nothing you can't do when you set your mind to it. Don't get carried away. I'm terrible at cooking. I can't sew worth a damn, and I definitely can't sing." Nobody's perfect. They stayed in the shelter for one more day, letting Ethan regain some strength. Lena changed his bandages and was relieved to see the wounds were healing clean. No infection, no red lines. Her stitches had held. On the second day, Ethan insisted on trying to stand. It went badly. His leg couldn't hold his weight. He got halfway up before it buckled, and only Lena catching him kept him from going down hard. "That's enough," she said, easing him back down. "I need to be able to drive." "You need to heal. I'll keep driving." "Lena, don't argue with me. You'll lose." He didn't argue, mostly because he knew she was right. They got back on the trail the next morning. Ethan lay in the wagon bed with his leg propped up while Maisie sat up front with Lena, helping navigate and calling out obstacles. The girl had grown quieter since the attack. She didn't sing as much, didn't ask as many questions. Sometimes Lena would catch her just staring at nothing, her small face too serious. "You okay?" Lena asked one afternoon. Maisie shrugged. "I keep thinking about those men, about what would have happened if you and Papa hadn't stopped them." "But we did stop them. This time. What about next time?" "What?" Lena didn't have a good answer for that, because the truth was, there might be a next time. The frontier didn't run out of desperate men. "Then we stop them again," she said finally, "as many times as we have to." "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified, but being scared doesn't mean you quit. It just means you keep going anyway." Maisie thought about that. "Mama used to say brave people aren't the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who are afraid and do it anyway." "Your mama was smart." "She was." Maisie was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she'd like you?" The question caught Lena off guard. "I don't know. Maybe." "I think she would. Papa likes you." Lena's hands tightened on the reins. "He say that?" "He doesn't have to, I can tell." Before Lena could figure out how to respond to that, Maisie pointed ahead. "Look, is that smoke?" It was. A thin column rising in the distance. Lena called back to Ethan. "You see that?" "I see it." He hauled himself up to sitting, wincing. Could be another trading post, or a settlement, or trouble. Always a possibility, but we need supplies. We're running low again. They approached cautiously. The smoke led them to a small cluster of buildings. Not a proper town, just 5 or 6 structures scattered around a central square. A few people moved between them, going about their business. One of them, a woman in a wool dress, stopped and stared as their wagon rolled in. Then she called out, "John, we got travelers." A man emerged from one of the buildings, older, with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Welcome. You folks look like you've had a hard journey." "That's one way to put it," Lena said. "Well, you're welcome here. Name's John Miller. This is my wife, Ruth. We got a few families settled here, trying to make a go of it before the real cold sets in." "We're not looking to stay," Ethan said from the wagon. "Just need supplies if you can spare them." John's eyes went to Ethan's bandaged leg. "That looks like it needs a doctor's attention." "We managed. I can see that, but my wife used to nurse before we came west. She's good with wounds. Ruth." The woman came over. She took one look at Ethan's leg and frowned. "How long ago did this happen?" 4 days, Lena said. Ruth climbed into the wagon without asking permission and unwrapped the bandages. She studied the stitches, prodded the wounds gently. Ethan tried not to flinch. "These are good," Ruth said, surprised. "Who did the sewing?" "I did," Lena said. Ruth looked at her with new respect. "You've got a steady hand. Probably saved his leg, maybe his life." She rewrapped the bandages with fresh cloth. "But he needs to stay off it for at least another week, preferably 2. "We don't have 2 weeks," Ethan said. "We've got land claims that—" "Won't matter if you're dead or crippled," Ruth interrupted. "You push that leg too hard now, it won't heal right. You'll limp the rest of your life if you're lucky." Lena and Ethan exchanged a look. "We can't afford to stop," Lena said quietly. "Can you afford not to?" John asked. That night, they made camp at the edge of the settlement. The Millers offered them space in one of the buildings, but Lena declined. She didn't trust walls yet, didn't trust being trapped inside if trouble came. Ethan understood. He didn't argue. Ruth brought them hot stew and fresh bread, refusing payment. "You help people when you can out here. That's how we survive." After she left, Maisie ate 3 bowls of stew and fell asleep before she finished the bread. Lena sat beside Ethan, both of them quiet. "We should stay," he said finally. "Few days at least." "I know. But you don't want to." "I don't want to lose the time. We're cutting it so close already." Ethan shifted his leg, grimaced. "Ruth's right, though. If I push this and it goes wrong, we won't make it at all." Lena knew he was right. Hated that he was right. 3 days, she said. "We give it 3 days. You rest, heal as much as you can. I'll hunt, restock our supplies. Then we push hard for the territory." "Deal." They stayed. 3 days turned into 5 because on the 3rd day, the sky opened up and dumped snow like Lena had never seen. It came down in sheets, piling up faster than they could shovel it away. The settlement hunkered down and waited it out. Lena spent the time helping where she could, chopping wood, hauling water, mending harnesses, keeping her hands busy so her mind wouldn't spiral into panic about the deadline, about the distance still ahead. Maisie played with the other children in the settlement. There were 3 of them, ranging from 4 to 9. Lena watched her run and laugh and act like a normal 6-year-old for the first time since they'd met, and something in her chest went tight. This was what the girl should have. Stability, safety, other children to play with, not a desperate flight across a frozen wilderness. On the 5th night, while the snow still fell, Ruth invited them for dinner in her home. It was warm inside, with a real table and chairs and the smell of roasting meat. Lena couldn't remember the last time she'd sat at a table. "How's the leg?" Ruth asked Ethan as she served venison and roasted potatoes. "Better? Still hurts, but I can put weight on it now." "Good. Give it another few days and you should be able to travel, if you're careful." "We'll be careful." After dinner, while the adults sat by the fire, Maisie fell asleep in a real bed for the first time in months. Ruth covered her with a quilt. "She's a sweet child," Ruth said. "You're lucky to have her." "We are," Ethan said. Ruth looked between him and Lena. "How long have you 2 been married?" "We're not," Lena said quickly. "I'm just traveling with them. We're headed to the same territory." "Oh." Ruth looked surprised. "I just assumed the way you look at each other." Lena felt her face heat. "We're not." But later, lying in her bedroll while Ethan and Maisie slept nearby, she thought about Ruth's words, "the way you look at each other." Did she look at Ethan a certain way? She'd been so focused on survival, on getting through each day, she hadn't paid attention to how she felt about the man who'd saved her life, the man she'd saved in return. She thought about his hands on her infected wound, gentle despite the pain he had to cause, about the way he played his flute by the fire, about how he'd thrown himself in front of her when that raider fired, about how somewhere along this trail he'd stopped being the stranger who wouldn't take no for an answer and become someone she couldn't imagine losing. That was dangerous. Caring was dangerous. But maybe, Lena thought, it was too late to stop. The snow finally cleared on the 7th day. They packed up to leave, despite Ruth's protests that Ethan needed more time. "We appreciate everything you've done," Ethan said, "but we have to go." John walked them to their wagon. "The trail ahead is rough this time of year. You sure you want to risk it?" "We don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." Ethan shook his head. "Not for us." They said their goodbyes and rolled out. Lena drove while Ethan sat beside her, his leg propped up on a box. Maisie waved to her new friends until they were out of sight. "They were nice," the girl said wistfully. "They were," Lena agreed. "Do you think we'll see them again?" "Maybe. If we settle nearby." "Would you like that? Settling nearby?" Lena thought about it. A week ago, she would have said no automatically. Her plan had always been to claim land far from anyone, to build a life alone where no one could hurt her. But now, watching Maisie's face light up at the thought of seeing her friends again, seeing Ethan smile despite his pain, Lena wasn't so sure. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." The trail got worse after the settlement. The snow had drifted deep in places, making it hard to tell where the path was. Twice they had to backtrack when the wagon got stuck. Ethan's leg held up better than Lena expected. He could walk now, though he limped badly. He insisted on taking turns driving, said it wasn't fair to make her do everything. She let him. Not because she needed the rest, though she did, but because she could see he needed to feel useful again. They were 9 days past the settlement when they saw the mountains. They rose up out of the plain like jagged teeth, white with snow, impossibly tall. The sight of them made Lena's breath catch. "That's where we're headed?" she asked. "Not over them," Ethan said. "Through them. There's a pass that should still be open, should get us to the territory with a week to spare." "Should," Lena repeated. "It's the best I can give you." They pushed towards the mountains. The temperature dropped as they climbed. Ice formed on the wagon wheels, making them slip on the rocky trail. The horses struggled, their breath coming in white clouds. 2 days from the mountains, disaster struck. They were crossing a narrow ridge when one of the wagon wheels hit a patch of ice. The whole rig slid sideways, tilting dangerously toward the edge. "Jump!" Ethan yelled. Lena threw herself clear. Maisie tumbled out behind her. For a heartbeat, Lena thought the wagon would tip, would go over the edge and take everything they had with it. But it held. Barely. The wagon sat at a steep angle, wedged against a boulder, both right side wheels hanging over open air. Ethan hauled himself out, favoring his bad leg. They stood there, staring at their wagon. "Well," he said finally. "That's not good." Lena almost laughed. It came out as something between a laugh and a sob. "That's one way to put it." They spent the rest of the day trying to get the wagon back on solid ground. They unhitched the horses, rigged ropes, pulled and pushed and cursed. Every time they thought they had it, the wagon would slip again, settling deeper against the boulder. By sunset, they'd made no progress. "We're going to have to unload it," Ethan said. "Make it lighter." So they did. In the fading light, they pulled out everything they could. Supplies, blankets, tools, all of it piled on the trail. The wagon got lighter, but it still wouldn't budge. "Maybe in the morning," Lena said, "when we're not exhausted." They made camp right there on the trail, too tired to go farther. Maisie fell asleep immediately, worn out from the day's work. Lena and Ethan sat by the fire, not talking. There wasn't much to say. They were stuck, running out of time, with mountains still ahead and winter closing in. "I'm sorry," Ethan said finally. "For what?" "For getting you into this. If you'd just left me that first day, you'd be safe now. Maybe already at your land claim." Lena poked at the fire. "You didn't get me into anything. I chose to come." "Because I wouldn't leave you alone." "No, because I wanted to." She looked at him. "Stop trying to take responsibility for my choices. I'm not some helpless thing you rescued. I can make my own decisions." "I know that." "Do you? Because it seems like you keep trying to protect me from consequences I'm willing to face." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing." He caught himself, smiled, noted. They sat in silence for a while. Then Ethan said, "What happens if we don't make it in time?" "We lose the land claims." "And then what?" Lena thought about that. A month ago, losing her claim would have felt like the end of everything. Now, sitting here on this frozen mountainside with Ethan beside her and Maisie sleeping nearby, it didn't feel quite so catastrophic. "I don't know," she admitted. "Find other land, I guess. Start over somewhere else." "Would you stay? With us?" The question hung in the cold air between them. "Is that what you want?" Lena asked. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "It is. Somewhere along this trail, you became part of this family. And He stopped, looked at her. "I don't want you to go." Lena's heart was beating too fast. "Ethan, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it, please." She thought about Sarah, about the woman who'd wanted this journey, about whether it was wrong to feel this way about a man whose wife had been dead less than a year. But then she thought about how Ethan looked at her. Not like something broken that needed fixing, but like an equal, a partner. "Okay," she said. "I'll think about it." They got the wagon free the next morning. It took all three of them and both horses and every bit of rope they had, but they managed. The wagon rolled back onto solid ground with a creaking groan. They reloaded it in record time, too aware of how much daylight they'd already lost. Then they pushed on toward the mountains. The pass was exactly where Ethan's map said it would be, a narrow cut between two peaks, just wide enough for a wagon. They entered it at midday, the walls of stone rising up on either side, blocking out most of the sky. It felt like riding into the mouth of something huge and hungry. The pass was slow going, ice coated the rocks, making the horses slip and stumble. The wagon wheels fought for purchase. Every 100 yards felt like a victory. They were halfway through when they heard it. A sound like thunder but wrong. Too sustained, too close. Ethan's head whipped around. "Avalanche!" Lena looked up. Snow was sliding down the mountainside to their right, gaining speed, growing into a white wall of death. "Move!" Ethan screamed. "Move now!" Lena snapped the reins. The horses lunged forward. The wagon careened through the pass, bouncing off rocks, wheels screaming. Behind them, the avalanche roared closer, a sound like the world ending. They weren't going to make it. The snow was too close, moving too fast. Ethan grabbed Maisie, pulled her tight against him. Lena leaned forward, urging the horses on. Faster, faster. They burst out of the pass. The avalanche slammed into the opening behind them, filling it completely, blocking the way they'd come. Dust and snow filled the air. The horses reared and screamed. Lena fought to keep control, finally getting them settled. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the wall of snow that had almost killed them. "That was close," Maisie whispered. "Too close," Ethan agreed. Lena's hands were shaking on the reins. "Is everyone okay?" "We're okay." Ethan looked back at the blocked pass. "But we're not going back that way." "Forward's the only option now, anyway." They camped that night in the shadow of the mountains, exhausted and rattled. None of them talked much. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like tempting fate. The next morning dawned clear and bright. They rolled down out of the foothills into a wide valley, and for the first time in weeks, the going was easy. The trail was good, the weather held, the horses moved with something like enthusiasm. "How far now?" Lena asked. Ethan checked his map. 3 days? Maybe 4. We might actually make it. Don't say that, you'll jinx it. I don't believe in jinxes. Neither did I, but I'm starting to reconsider. That night, Maisie asked, "When we get there, are we going to stop?" "Stop what?" Ethan asked. "Stop running. Stop almost dying. Stop being scared all the time." Lena and Ethan looked at each other. "Yeah," Ethan said. "We're going to stop. We're going to build a house and plant crops and live like normal people." "What's normal?" "Boring, mostly," Maisie grinned. "Good. I like boring." They reached the land office with 2 days to spare, just walked in, covered in trail dust, exhausted and half frozen, and filed their claims. The clerk barely looked up. "That'll be $2 each." Ethan paid. So did Lena. The clerk stamped their papers and handed them over. "Congratulations. You're now landowners in Oregon Territory. Welcome." It was the most anticlimactic moment of Lena's life. They walked out of the office into weak winter sunlight. Maisie was bouncing on her toes, giddy with relief. Ethan was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since Lena had met him. "We did it," he said. "We did," Lena agreed. She looked down at the papers in her hand, proof of land, of ownership, of the fresh start she'd been chasing, everything she'd wanted. But standing there on that street corner, with Ethan beside her and Maisie between them, Lena realized something. The land wasn't what mattered anymore. These people were. They stood outside the land office for a long moment, papers in hand, not quite believing it was over. The journey that had nearly killed them, that had taken everything they had, it was done. They'd won. Except it didn't feel like winning yet. It felt like standing at the edge of something new and uncertain, with no map to follow. "Where do we go now?" Maisie asked. Ethan folded his papers carefully. "We need to see the land first, figure out where we're building." "Both claims are in the same valley," Lena said, checking her documents. "About 15 miles north of here." "Then that's where we go." They bought supplies in town, nails, tools, seed for spring planting, enough food to last through winter. Ethan's silver was almost gone by the time they finished, but they had what they needed. The ride north took most of the day. The valley opened up before them around sunset, wide and flat, with a creek running through the middle and timber on the surrounding hills. Good land, the kind you could build a life on if you were willing to work for it. Ethan pulled up on a rise overlooking the valley. "This is it." Lena climbed down from the wagon and walked a few steps into the tall grass. Her land. Hers. Nobody could take this from her, couldn't sell it out from under her, couldn't claim she didn't deserve it. But looking at all that empty space, she felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Loneliness. "Which claim is yours?" she asked Ethan. He checked his papers. "The western section, I think. Yours would be the eastern. So we'd be neighbors. Looks that way." Maisie tugged on Lena's sleeve. "How far apart?" "Maybe a mile? Maybe less." The girl's face fell. "That's far." "It's not that far," Ethan said. "You could walk it easy." But Lena heard what Maisie wasn't saying. After months of sleeping in the same wagon, eating around the same fire, facing every danger together, a mile felt like an ocean. It felt wrong. They made camp in a sheltered spot near the creek. Tomorrow they'd start surveying the land properly, figure out where to build. Tonight they just needed to rest. After dinner, Ethan got out his flute and played. The notes drifted across the empty valley, lonely and beautiful. Maisie leaned against Lena, half asleep already. When the song ended, Lena said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you really push to help me that first day?" "The truth." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You want the truth?" "Yeah, because you reminded me of Sarah, not in looks or anything like that, but the way you wouldn't quit, the way you'd rather die than ask for help." He stared into the fire. "Sarah was like that, stubborn as hell. When she got sick, she kept saying she was fine, kept pushing herself when she should have been resting. By the time she admitted she needed help, it was too late." His voice got rough. "I couldn't save her, but maybe I could save you." Lena didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent so long thinking she didn't want to be saved, didn't need anyone. But hearing the pain in Ethan's voice, understanding what her refusal must have cost him, "I'm glad you didn't listen," she said quietly. "Me too." Maisie stirred against her shoulder. "Are you going to get married?" "Maisie," Ethan said. "What? You said you liked her, and she's nice, and we're already a family, sort of. Getting married just makes it official." Lena felt heat creep up her neck. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not?" "Because people don't just get married because it's convenient." "Mama and Papa did," Maisie said matter-of-factly. "Papa told me once. They got married because Mama was pregnant with me, and it was the right thing to do. But then they fell in love for real." Ethan covered his face with his hand. "Maisie, please stop talking." "Why? It's true." "That doesn't mean you need to share it." But Lena was looking at Ethan with new understanding. "You married Sarah because you had to?" "It's more complicated than that." "How?" He sighed. "Her father was going to throw her out. She had nowhere to go. I'd known her since we were kids, and I cared about her, so I married her, made it right." He looked at Lena. "And Maisie's correct. We fell in love after. It took time, but we got there. Built something real." "Do you still love her?" Lena asked. "Part of me always will. She gave me Maisie. She gave me hope when I didn't have any." He paused. "But she's gone. And I'm still here. And at some point, you have to decide if you're going to spend the rest of your life looking backward or if you're going to start looking forward." The words hung in the cold air between them. Maisie yawned. "I think you should look forward. Lena's right here." "That's enough," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "Bed. Now." The girl grumbled but went. Lena helped tuck her in, then came back to the fire. "Sorry about that," Ethan said. "She doesn't have much of a filter. Kids usually don't." "She's not wrong, though, about looking forward." He met Lena's eyes. "I meant what I said before. I want you to stay, not on separate land a mile away. Here, with us." Lena's heart was hammering. "Ethan, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet, anyway. I know it's too soon and we're both still figuring things out. But I'm asking you to build a life here with us. As partners. As family." He reached for her hand. "I'm asking you to choose this. Choose us." Lena looked down at their joined hands. His was warm, solid, real. A week ago, she would have pulled away. Would have said she didn't need anyone, didn't want the risk. But sitting here under a sky full of stars, with a sleeping child in the wagon and a good man asking her to stay, Lena realized something. She'd already chosen. Somewhere between the broken wagon and the frozen pass, between the fever nights and the gunfight, she'd stopped running and started building towards something. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll stay. We'll build together." Ethan's smile was like sunrise. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, asking a question. Lena kissed him back, giving her answer. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling like fools. "So," Ethan said, "one house or two?" "Let's start with one. See how it goes." "Practical." "Always." They started building the next day. The first thing they needed was shelter, something better than the wagon before the real winter storms hit. They chose a spot near the creek with good access to timber and water. The ground was level enough to build on but elevated enough to avoid flooding. Ethan sketched out a plan in the dirt. "Nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a roof. We can expand later if we need to." "How long will it take?" "If the weather holds? 3 weeks? Maybe 4. And if it doesn't hold, then we work in the snow and hope we don't freeze to death before we finish. They cut timber from the hills, pine and fir, straight and tall. Maisie helped strip bark while Lena and Ethan notched the logs. It was brutal work. Lena's hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders ached every morning. But slowly the walls went up. On the fourth day, they had company. A wagon rolled up this valley, and Lena reached for her rifle before recognizing the people in it. John and Ruth Miller, from the settlement. "We heard you made it," John called out. "Thought we'd come to see how you were settling in." "You came all this way just to check on us?" Ethan asked. "Not just that. We brought help." Behind their wagon came 3 more. Families from the settlement, all willing to spend a few days helping raise the cabin. By the end of the week, the walls were up and the roof frame was set. "You didn't have to do this," Lena said to Ruth as they worked on chinking the gaps between logs. "Course we did. That's what neighbors do." "We're not even in your settlement." "You're in the valley. Close enough." Ruth paused in her work. "Besides, you helped us when you were there. Chopped wood, hauled water. Didn't have to, but you did. This is just returning the favor." Lena thought about that. About how different this was from the world she'd known before, where people kept to themselves, where asking for help was seen as weakness. Maybe she'd been wrong about needing to do everything alone. The Millers and the other families stayed for 10 days. By the time they left, the cabin was finished. It wasn't much. 1 room with a loft, a stone fireplace, windows covered with oiled paper, but it was solid. It would keep them alive through winter. On the last night before the families left, they had a celebration. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else had saved a bottle of whiskey for special occasions. They built up the fire and cooked a proper meal and danced in the dirt outside the new cabin. Maisie danced with the other children, spinning and laughing. Ethan danced with Lena, both of them clumsy and self-conscious at first, then relaxing into it. "Not bad for a couple of people who almost died a dozen times in the last few months," Ethan said. "We clean up okay." "Better than okay." He pulled her closer. "I was thinking, dangerous. That maybe come spring, we should make it official. The getting married part." Lena's breath caught. "That's a proposal?" "It's a terrible proposal. I can do better. Give me a few months to practice." "You better." But she was smiling. "Ask me again in spring. We'll see." "That's not a no. It's not a yes either. I'll take it." When the families left the next morning, the valley felt quieter, emptier, but not lonely. Lena, Ethan, and Maisie stood outside their cabin and waved until the wagons disappeared over the rise. "Now what?" Maisie asked. "Now we live," Ethan said. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled up past the windows. The creek froze solid. Some days it was too cold to go outside at all. They just huddled around the fireplace and tried to stay warm. But they'd prepared well. They had food enough, firewood stacked to the roof, and they had each other. Lena learned to cook, really cook, not just throw beans in a pot. Ethan taught her, patient and amused when she burned things or added too much salt. Maisie helped, standing on a stool to reach the work table. On the long winter nights, they told stories. Ethan told Maisie about her mother, not the sad stories, but the good ones. How Sarah had once tried to milk a cow that turned out to be a bull. How she'd insisted on learning to shoot and nearly taken Ethan's ear off the first time. Lena told them about her childhood, the good parts, before everything went wrong. About summer thunderstorms and winter sledding and the year the chickens decided to roost in the barn rafters. Maisie told them elaborate tales about princesses and dragons and talking animals, making them up as she went along. Sometimes Ethan would play his flute. Sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence. It was, Lena thought, the closest to peace she'd ever felt. But peace didn't mean easy. They fought sometimes, about how to arrange the cabin, about whether to plant wheat or corn come spring, about nothing and everything. Lena had to learn to share space with people again, had to relearn how to compromise. One night in deep January, after a particularly stupid argument about where to store the tools, Lena went outside despite the cold. She stood in the snow and tried to remember why she'd thought this was a good idea. Ethan came out a few minutes later. "You're going to freeze." "Maybe." "Lena, I'm not good at this," she said, "at being part of something. I keep wanting to do everything myself, make all the decisions, and then I get angry when you push back." "You think I don't know that? Then why do you put up with it?" Ethan came to stand beside her. Because underneath all that stubborn pride, you're a good person. Because you saved my daughter's life. Because you make me laugh even when you're being difficult. He bumped her shoulder with his. And because I'm not perfect either. I try to control everything because I'm scared of losing people. We're both a mess. That's comforting. We'll figure it out. Just takes practice. They went back inside, apologized to each other, decided the tools could go wherever Lena wanted because Ethan honestly didn't care that much. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, but it was real. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The snow melted, the creek thawed and ran high with runoff. Green shoots pushed up through the mud. They plowed the fields, Ethan guiding the horses while Lena and Maisie followed behind, pulling rocks and roots. It took weeks to prepare the ground, longer to plant. But finally the seeds were in, and all they could do was wait. On a warm April evening, Ethan asked Lena to walk with him. They followed the creek up into the hills, away from the cabin. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. "You'll see." He led her to a spot where the creek widened into a small pool, surrounded by willows just starting to leaf out. It was beautiful, peaceful, and private. "I wanted to ask you something," Ethan said, "and I wanted to do it properly this time." Lena's heart started beating faster. Ethan took her hands. "I know we've only known each other about 8 months, and most of that time we were just trying not to die. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, with your stubbornness and your strength and the way you refused to quit even when you probably should have." He smiled. "You're not perfect. Neither am I. But we work. We fit. And I can't imagine building this life with anyone else." He got down on one knee. "Lena Cross, will you marry me?" Lena looked down at him. This man who'd saved her life, who'd let her save his, who'd become her partner in every way that mattered. She thought about the woman she'd been when her wagon broke down, so determined to die alone rather than accept help. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about doing everything yourself. It was about knowing when to let people in. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." Ethan stood up and kissed her, and it felt like coming home. They got married in June, in front of the cabin they'd built together. John Miller officiated. He'd been a preacher before coming west. The Millers and the other settlement families came, along with a few neighbors who'd settled nearby over the winter. Maisie stood between them during the ceremony, holding both their hands. When John asked who gave this woman to be married, Maisie said loudly, "I do. I picked her out myself." Everyone laughed. Lena wore a dress Ruth had helped her sew. Nothing fancy, just simple blue cotton. Ethan wore his cleanest shirt. Maisie had wildflowers woven into her hair. They said their vows in the afternoon sun, promising to stay together through whatever came next. Through hard winters and crop failures and illness and all the thousand small disasters that life would throw at them. When John pronounced them married, Ethan kissed Lena and Maisie cheered, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled, a summer storm rolling in. They danced in the rain that night, all of them soaked and laughing. Lena couldn't remember the last time she'd been this happy, couldn't remember ever feeling this certain about anything. Later, after everyone had gone and Maisie was asleep in the loft, Lena and Ethan sat on the porch and watched the storm move across the valley. "You ever think about how different things would be if you'd just left me by that wagon?" Lena asked. "Sometimes." And I'm glad I didn't. Even with everything that happened, the fever, the raiders, almost dying about 50 different ways, I'm glad. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Ethan said, "Sarah would have liked you, I think." "Yeah?" "Yeah, she would have appreciated how you don't take any of my nonsense. She was the same way." He smiled. "And she would have been glad that Maisie has someone, that I'm not alone." "You think she'd mind? Us being together?" "No. Sarah was practical above all else. She'd want us to be happy, to build something good." He looked at Lena. "And we are. We did." Lena leaned against his shoulder. "We really did, didn't we?" Against all odds. The summer passed in a blur of work. The crops grew tall. They built a chicken coop and bought hens. Started planning additions to the cabin, another room, maybe 2, for when the family expanded. Maisie turned 7 in August. They celebrated with a cake Lena had actually managed not to burn, and presents the Millers had brought when they visited, a real doll with a china face, books for learning to read better, a new dress. The girl was thriving. She'd grown 3 inches over the winter, lost a tooth, learned to ride dust bareback. She didn't have nightmares anymore about the raiders or the fever or the avalanche. She was just a normal 7-year-old living a normal life. In September, Lena realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan on a cool evening while they were bringing in the last of the harvest. He stopped in the middle of loading a wagon and just stared at her. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I've been through this before, remember?" "But that was years ago. I know." She'd never told him what happened to that baby, how she'd lost it in the 4th month, how it had nearly killed her. "This time will be different." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not alone this time. Because I'm strong. Because I've survived worse than childbirth." Ethan pulled her into his arms. "A baby. A baby. Maisie's going to lose her mind." They told her that night. Maisie screamed and jumped and talked so fast they couldn't understand half of what she was saying. Something about names and sharing her room and teaching the baby everything she knew. "It won't come until spring," Lena said, laughing. "You've got time to calm down." "I don't want to calm down. This is the best thing ever." Winter came again, but this time they were ready for it. The cabin was snug, the stores were full, and Lena's belly grew round with new life. She had bad days when the sickness was overwhelming, when she was tired and scared and convinced something would go wrong. But Ethan was there. Maisie was there. They took care of her the way she'd taken care of them. In February, when the snow was deep and the nights were long, Lena woke Ethan in the middle of the night. "It's time." He rode through a blizzard to get Ruth. By the time they got back, Lena's labor was well underway. It was long and hard and terrifying, but Ruth knew what she was doing. Just before dawn, Lena gave birth to a boy. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, and Lena held him and cried. She'd made it. He'd made it. They were both alive. "What are we going to name him?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lena looked at her husband, at the baby in her arms, at Maisie peeking down from the loft with wonder on her face. "Hope," she said. "We'll call him Hope, because that's what he was. Hope for the future. Hope that they could build something lasting. Hope that the hard journey had been worth it." Spring came, and with it, new life everywhere. The baby grew, the crops came up green and strong, the valley filled with settlers, and the wilderness started to feel like home. One evening in May, Lena stood outside the cabin and looked at what they'd built. The fields stretching out in neat rows. The barn they'd added over the winter. The garden Maisie had planted herself. The life they'd carved out of nothing but determination and hard work and love. Ethan came up behind her, the baby in his arms. "What are you thinking?" "That I almost missed this. All of it." "But you didn't." "No, thanks to you." "Thanks to us," he corrected. "We saved each other." Maisie ran past, chasing chickens and laughing. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the distance, their neighbors were calling in their children for supper. It was ordinary. It was perfect. It was everything Lena had never known she wanted. She'd come west looking for land and found a family instead. Had come looking for independence and found partnership. Had come expecting to live and die alone, and instead discovered that the best kind of strength was the kind you shared. The journey had nearly killed them all a dozen times over. But standing here now, with her husband beside her and her children safe and happy, Lena knew one thing for certain. It had been worth every frozen mile. The years didn't get easier exactly. They just got different. Hope turned out to be a difficult baby, colicky and fussy, never sleeping more than 2 hours at a stretch. Lena walked the floor with him night after night, exhausted and sometimes resentful that motherhood was so much harder than she'd remembered. Or maybe she'd just blocked out the hard parts after losing the first one. Ethan took turns when he could, but the farm demanded long hours. Fields didn't plow themselves. Crops didn't harvest themselves. Animals needed tending no matter how little sleep you'd had. One particularly bad night, when Hope had been crying for 3 hours straight and nothing Lena did would soothe him, she found herself standing in the dark cabin thinking about how much simpler life had been when it was just her. Then Maisie climbed down from the loft, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You want me to try?" the girl asked. "You need to sleep, sweetheart." "So do you." Maisie took the baby and walked him around the room, humming one of the songs Ethan played on his flute. Within 10 minutes, Hope was asleep. Lena stared at her stepdaughter. How did you do that? I don't know. Maybe he just likes me better. That's entirely possible. They both smiled. Maisie handed the baby back carefully. Mama used to say that the hard nights are what make you appreciate the easy ones, that if everything was always good, you wouldn't know what good felt like. Lena touched the girl's cheek. Your mama was smarter than I gave her credit for. I know. Over the next 2 years, the valley filled up with people. What had been empty wilderness when they arrived became a patchwork of homesteads, some successful, some struggling, all of them trying to build something permanent in a place that fought permanence. The Millers moved closer, settling on land about 3 miles south. Other families followed. By the time Hope learned to walk, there were enough children in the valley to start talking about building a school. They held a meeting at the Millers' place to discuss it. 20 adults crowded into the small cabin, arguing about location and cost and who would teach. Ruth could do it, someone suggested. Ruth shook her head. I've got my hands full with the store we're trying to open, but Lena here used to teach, didn't you? Every eye turned to Lena. I didn't teach, she said quickly. I just helped my mother with the younger kids back in Missouri. That's teaching enough, John Miller said, and we need someone. Kids are running wild out here with nothing structured to do. Lena wanted to refuse. She had enough on her plate with Hope still barely sleeping through the night and the farm needing constant attention. But she looked around the room at all these families who'd become friends, who'd helped raise her cabin and celebrated her wedding and brought food when the baby was born. All right, she heard herself say, I'll do it. Ethan caught her eye across the room. He was smiling, proud. The school ended up being a simple log structure built near the creek, big enough for maybe 15 children. They held class 3 days a week, reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever Lena could teach from the few books they had between them. Maisie was her star pupil, already reading better than some of the older kids. But teaching the others was harder than Lena expected. Some came from families that didn't value education. Some only showed up when farm work was light. Some were so far behind that catching up seemed impossible. One boy in particular frustrated her, 10-year-old Thomas Garrett, whose father beat him when he got answers wrong. The boy would sit in class with fresh bruises, flinching every time Lena moved too fast. After class one day, she kept him back. Thomas, can we talk? The boy's eyes went wide with fear. I didn't do nothing wrong. I know. I just wanted to see if you were okay. I'm fine. Those bruises on your arms say different. Thomas pulled his sleeve down. It's none of your business. Maybe not, but I care anyway. The boy's face crumpled. He says I'm stupid, that I'll never amount to nothing, that teaching me is a waste of time. Lena knelt down to his level. Your father's wrong. You're not stupid. You're bright and capable, and you're going to do just fine. You really think so? I know so. She talked to Ethan about it that night. I don't know what to do. If I confront the father, he'll just pull Thomas out of school. But if I do nothing, then the boy keeps getting hurt, Ethan finished. It's a bad situation either way. So what do I do? What you always do. You figure it out. Lena decided to try a different approach. She started giving Thomas extra attention in class, praising his progress, building up his confidence. When he got things right, she made a big deal of it. When he struggled, she stayed patient, worked with him until he understood. Slowly, the boy started to change. His shoulders straightened. He smiled more. He volunteered answers. His father showed up at the school one afternoon, angry. What are you telling my boy? That he's smart, that he can learn, that he's worth the effort. You're filling his head with nonsense, making him think he's better than he is. I'm teaching him the truth. What you do with it is your choice. The man stormed off, but Thomas kept coming to school, and Lena kept teaching him, and eventually the boy started standing up to his father, not in big ways, just small acts of defiance, of self-respect. Years later, Thomas would leave the valley and become a teacher himself, but Lena didn't know that yet. She just knew that some battles were worth fighting even when you couldn't see the end. Hope grew from a difficult baby into a wild toddler who climbed everything and feared nothing. He fell out of trees, tumbled into the creek, ate things he shouldn't. Lena spent half her time terrified he'd kill himself and the other half marveling at his fearlessness. He's like you, Ethan said one evening after fishing Hope out of the horse trough for the 3rd time that week. I was never that reckless. You absolutely were. You just forgot. Maisie, now 9, appointed herself Hope's guardian. She followed him around, pulling him away from danger, scolding him when he did something stupid. He adored her, followed her everywhere, cried when she left for school without him. "When can I go to school?" he asked one morning, watching Maisie get ready. "When you're 5, Lena said. "How long is that?" 2 more years. "That's forever." Lena couldn't help but laugh. 2 years had seemed like forever to her once, too. Now they seemed to pass in a blink. In Hope's 4th summer, disaster struck again. A drought hit the valley. The creek dropped to a trickle. The crops withered in the fields despite their best efforts to irrigate. By August, it was clear the harvest would be bad. By September, it was clear there might not be a harvest at all. The settlers gathered to figure out what to do. Some talked about leaving, heading back east where rain was more reliable. Others wanted to stick it out, pray for better weather next year. Ethan and Lena sat up late that night doing calculations. Their stores would get them through winter if they were careful. But there'd be nothing left for spring planting, no seed, no money to buy seed. "We could take a loan," Ethan said. "From who?" "There's a bank in town now. They're offering credit to farmers." Lena's stomach tightened. She'd seen what debt could do, how it could eat away at everything you'd built until there was nothing left. "I don't like it," she said. "Neither do I. But what choice do we have?" They argued about it for days. Lena wanted to find another way, sell something, work extra jobs in town, anything but take on debt. Ethan said they couldn't make it without help. Finally, Lena gave in. "Fine, but we pay it back fast, first priority before anything else." Agreed. They took the loan, $50 at 15% interest. It felt like a noose around Lena's neck. The next year's crop was better, but not good enough to pay off the debt. They made their payments, but barely. The year after that was the same. The debt hung over them, a constant weight. Lena took on more students, charged a small fee for teaching. Ethan hired himself out for carpentry work when he could spare the time. They scraped and saved and went without. Maisie, 11 now, started helping more around the farm. She could plow a field as well as any adult, could milk the cows and tend the chickens and manage Hope when Lena was teaching. One night Lena found the girl crying in the barn. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Nothing." "Doesn't look like nothing." Maisie wiped her eyes. The other girls at school were talking about their dresses, about the social next month and what they're going to wear. And I wanted to care, but all I could think about was whether we'll make this month's loan payment. Lena sat down beside her. "You shouldn't have to worry about that." "But I do. Because if we lose the farm, we lose everything, and I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose another home. I can't." Lena pulled her close. "You won't, I promise." "How can you promise that?" "Because I've survived worse than debt. So have you. So has your father. We'll figure it out." But privately, Lena wasn't sure. The debt was crushing them, and if they had one more bad year, one more disaster, they might not make it. The disaster came in winter. Ethan was working on the barn roof when he fell. The ladder slipped on ice, and he went down hard, landing on his bad leg, the one that had taken the bullet years before. The bone broke clean through. Ruth said it as best she could, but it was bad. Ethan would be laid up for months, maybe permanently crippled, and without him working, without his carpentry income, they'd never make the loan payments. Lena sat beside his bed that night and tried not to panic. "It's going to be okay," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "Stop lying. I'm not—" "Yes, you are. This is bad. We both know it." He reached for her hand. "So we figure it out. Like we always do. I'm tired of figuring things out. I'm tired of barely making it." "I know. Me too." Lena squeezed his hand, then stood up. "Rest. I'll handle this." "Lena," I said, "I'll handle it." She worked like she'd never worked before. She took over all of Ethan's carpentry jobs, learning as she went, making mistakes but finishing the work. She taught every day and farmed every evening. She slept maybe 4 hours a night. Maisie stepped up too, taking care of Hope and her father, managing the house. At 12 years old, she was more capable than most adults. "You're doing too much," the girl said one night, watching Lena nearly fall asleep in her dinner. "I'm doing what needs doing. You're going to kill yourself." "Not if I can help it." But Maisie was right. Lena was burning out. Her hands shook from exhaustion. She snapped at the children for small things. She lay awake at night, mind racing with worries and calculations and fears. One morning she woke to find Maisie gone. Hope was still asleep. Ethan was resting, but Maisie's bed was empty, and there was a note on the table. Gone to town. Back tonight. Don't worry. Lena worried anyway. Maisie came back at sunset with John and Ruth Miller and 3 other families from the settlement. They were carrying tools and supplies and determined expressions. What's going on? Lena asked. We're helping, Ruth said simply. Your family helped build our settlement. Now we're helping you. We can't pay. We're not asking for payment. We're asking you to let us help. Over the next 2 weeks, the settlement families took over the farm work. They plowed fields, repaired fences, tended animals. They brought food and stayed to cook it. They sat with Ethan, kept him company, helped him stay sane while his leg healed, and they refused to take a single penny. Why are you doing this? Lena asked Ruth one evening. Because that's what community means. When one of us struggles, all of us help. Otherwise, what's the point of building this place together? Lena had spent so many years believing she had to do everything alone, that accepting help was weakness, that owing people was dangerous. But watching her neighbors work her fields, watching them care for her family like it was their own, she understood something she'd been too stubborn to see before. Strength wasn't about independence. It was about knowing when to let people carry you until you could walk again. Thank you, she said quietly. Ruth smiled. You'd do the same for us. And she would. Lena knew she would. Ethan healed slowly. His leg would never be the same. He'd always limp, would always hurt when the weather changed. But he could walk, could work, with modifications. They made their loan payments, barely, and kept the farm. By the time Hope started school at 5, the valley had transformed into a real community. There was a store now, a church, a blacksmith. The trail that had nearly killed them had become a road with regular wagon traffic. Civilization had caught up with the wilderness. Lena stood outside the schoolhouse one morning, watching the children arrive. Hope ran in ahead, excited for his first day. Maisie, now 13 and too cool for school, had taken a job helping Ruth at the store. Ethan came up beside her, moving slow but steady. Hard to believe we've been here almost 7 years. Feels like longer sometimes, like we've always been here. You ever regret it, coming west? Lena thought about that question, about the woman she'd been beside that broken wagon, so determined to die alone rather than accept help. About everything that had happened since, the near deaths, the struggles, the moments of joy and connection. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. Do you? Not for a second. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching their world. That evening, Lena found the old papers from her land claim tucked away in a box. She hadn't looked at them in years. The paper was yellowed now, the ink faded. She traced her name with one finger. This was supposed to have been everything. Her fresh start, her independence, her proof that she didn't need anyone. But looking at it now, she realized the land had never been the point. The point was what you built on it, who you built it with. She tucked the papers away and went outside where Ethan was teaching Hope how to throw an axe. The boy was terrible at it, but determined. He reminded her so much of herself at that age. Stubborn, fearless, convinced he could do anything if he just tried hard enough. Maisie came home from the store full of gossip about who was courting who, about the traveling salesman who'd tried to cheat Ruth and gotten thrown out. She'd grown into a bright, capable young woman, still protective of her family but finding her own way in the world. This was what mattered. Not the land, not the independence. This. Years kept passing. Hope grew tall and wild. Maisie fell in love with a farmer's son from the next valley over. The debt got paid off, finally, after 6 years of scraping. The farm became profitable, then successful. Lena kept teaching, watching generations of children grow up and start families of their own. Thomas Garrett came back to visit once, a grown man now, and thanked her for believing in him when no one else did. Ethan's leg got worse as he aged, the old injury compounding with arthritis and hard work. Some days he could barely walk. But he never complained, just adjusted, found new ways to do what needed doing. When Maisie got married at 19, Lena cried through the whole ceremony. Not sad tears, she was happy for the girl, liked her chosen husband. But it felt like losing something precious, watching her stepdaughter start a new life. She'll still be close, Ethan said, putting his arm around her. Just 2 miles down the road. I know, but it won't be the same. No, it won't. But that's how it's supposed to work. We raise them and they leave, and we're proud even though it hurts. Lena leaned into him. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just never listened. She elbowed him gently. They watched Maisie dance with her new husband, both of them glowing with joy. We did good, Lena said. We did. Hope turned out to be a wanderer. He left at 17 to see what was beyond the valley, promising to come back, but needing to find out who he was first. Lena understood that drive better than most. Let him go, she told Ethan when he wanted to insist the boy stay. But the farm will survive without him. He needs this. Let him figure out his own path. So they let him go, and it hurt, but it was right. The valley kept growing. The settlement became a town with a proper name, Millerville, after the family that had helped so many others get started. There was talk of the railroad coming through, of Oregon becoming a state instead of a territory. Progress, people called it. Lena wasn't sure it was progress exactly. More like change. Some of it good, some less so. The wilderness was disappearing, replaced by farms and fences and roads. Part of her missed the wild openness of those early years. But mostly she was grateful for the stability, the community, the sense of belonging. On a summer evening, when Lena was 57 years old, she and Ethan sat on the porch of their cabin, expanded now to 4 rooms with a real glass window and a painted door. They watched the sun set behind the mountains, the same mountains they'd crossed so many years ago. You think we'll see Hope again? Ethan asked. They hadn't heard from their son in 6 months. Eventually, he's got your stubborn streak. He'll work it out of his system and come home. And if he doesn't, then we'll know he found something better, and we'll be happy for him. Ethan reached for her hand. His fingers were gnarled now with arthritis, spotted with age, but his grip was still strong. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous. He smiled at the old joke. About that day we met, when your wagon broke down. What about it? You know what I saw when I looked at you? Someone who wanted to die alone? No. Someone who was terrified of living, terrified of trying again, of risking again, easier to die than to take that chance. Lena thought about that. You're not wrong. But you did it anyway. You took the chance, and look what came of it. Lena looked at the farm they'd built, the life they'd created. At Maisie's house visible in the distance, smoke rising from her chimney, at the valley full of people who'd become family. We got lucky, she said. We worked our tails off. That too. They sat in silence as the light faded. Somewhere a nightbird called. The wind moved through the wheat fields, making them whisper. I love you, Ethan said. I don't say it enough, but I do. I know. I love you too. Even though I forced you to accept help that day? Especially because of that. You saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. That's worth more than I can say. They watched the stars come out, the same stars they'd navigated by on that desperate journey west. But now they weren't running toward something or away from something. They were just here, together, in the life they'd built with their own hands and hearts. Ethan died 3 years later, in his sleep, peacefully. The leg that had never fully healed finally gave him an infection he couldn't fight. He was 63 years old. Lena buried him on the hill overlooking the valley, next to the spot they'd already reserved for her. Maisie stood on one side of her, Hope, who'd come home when he heard his father was sick, on the other. The whole valley came to the funeral. People whose children Lena had taught. People Ethan had helped build homes for. People who'd become family over the decades. They told stories about him, his kindness, his stubbornness, his terrible jokes. They talked about how he'd welcomed strangers and helped neighbors and built a community out of wilderness. Lena listened to it all and thought about the man who'd refused to leave her dying beside a broken wagon, who'd saved her life and let her save his, who'd become her partner in every way that mattered. Thank you, she whispered when everyone had gone and she was alone at the grave, for not listening when I said no, for being stubborn enough for both of us, for giving me this life. The wind rustled through the grass. Somewhere down in the valley, children were playing. Lena went back to her cabin and lived. She kept teaching until her eyes got too bad to read the books. She kept farming with Maisie's help until her body couldn't do it anymore. She watched her grandchildren grow up, met her great-grandchildren. Hope came back for good eventually, brought a wife from California, and settled on land near his sister. The farm stayed in the family, passed down through the generations. And every year on the anniversary of the day her wagon broke down, Lena would walk to Ethan's grave and tell him about their year, about the grandchildren and the harvest and all the small miracles of ordinary life. She lived to be 78 years old, a good long life by frontier standards. When her time came, she was ready. She'd done what she set out to do and more. She'd built something lasting. They buried her next to Ethan on that hill overlooking the valley. Maisie, gray-haired now with grandchildren of her own, stood over the grave and told the story one more time, about a woman who'd been ready to die alone and a man who wouldn't let her, about a journey that nearly killed them all, about how they'd saved each other in 100 different ways and built a life worth living. She taught me that strength isn't about doing everything yourself, Maisie said to the gathered crowd. It's about knowing when to hold on and when to let go, when to stand alone and when to stand together. She taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. The mourners nodded. They all had their own stories about Lena, the teacher who'd believed in them, the neighbor who'd helped them, the friend who'd been there when they needed her. They laid her to rest as the sun set behind the mountains, the same mountains she'd crossed 45 years earlier. The valley spread out below, green and prosperous and full of life. And if you stood on that hill in the quiet of evening, you could almost hear it, the sound of a wagon rolling west, of horses' hooves on hard ground, of three people who'd found each other in the wilderness and refused to let go. The frontier had been hard, unforgiving. It had taken everything they had and demanded more. But it had also given them something precious, the chance to become who they were meant to be. To find family not in blood but in choice. To discover that survival wasn't the end goal, it was just the beginning. The wilderness was gone now, replaced by farms and towns and railways. But the lessons remained, passed down through generations. That community matters more than independence, that accepting help is a kind of strength, that the hardest journeys often lead to the best destinations, and that sometimes, the worst day of your life, when your wagon breaks down and you're ready to die alone, can be the first day of something beautiful. If you're brave enough to let someone help you, if you're strong enough to admit you can't do it all yourself, if you're willing to choose connection over isolation, partnership over pride. Lena Cross had learned that lesson the hard way, and she'd spent the rest of her life teaching it to anyone who would listen. Not through words, necessarily, but through the way she lived, the way she loved, the way she built a home in the wilderness and filled it with people who mattered. That was her legacy. Not the land or the farm or the school, but the understanding that we're not meant to walk through this world alone, that the strongest walls are the ones built together, that family is what you make of it, not what you're born into, and that sometimes the person who saves your life is also the person who teaches you how to live it. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The valley settled into quiet, and on the hill where two gravestones stood side by side, the wind whispered through the grass like a promise kept. They'd made it. Against all odds, through every hardship, they'd made it, and in the end, that was enough.